Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about all matters relating to trust, probate, and estate, both from a planning perspective and from an administration perspective, whether it's for your own situation or as a professional. So like me, I'm a professional fiduciary. I administrate estates for other people. So today we're going to talk about a uh, a topic that I'm going to sound repetitive here. A topic that's I would think would be more topical, and yet I haven't seen it addressed in any of the trainings and meetings that I've come across, and that is the topic of uh, digital estate planning. So I haven't done this for a while. I put together a PowerPoint to go over some of these issues, and I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot to talk about here. Okay, so hang 1 second. There we go, and I'm just moving my notes over so that we can. Oh, you know what? That's right. It's going to have to go over here. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we are, digital estates planning. And so next slide, we'll go. Okay, so haven't talked about the 3 pillars of attainment recently, but everything we do in the Way to Wow shows relates to the 3 pillars of attainment: self, relationships, pursuits. On this show, we deal primarily in the pursuits pillar, primarily in the finances realm. Although, because we're talking about estate planning and administration, it inevitably deals with relationships as well as our self, our identity, our mindset, etc. So, if you're new to the Way to Wow shows, there's a whole show on the 3 pillars of attainment. Just go to my YouTube channel and check it out there. Okay, so in dealing with digital estate planning, the first thing we need to do is make an accounting of all digital assets. I use that term somewhat loosely because they won't necessarily have intrinsic value per se, but they have value to us. Okay, and you can see the list here. Online accounts, number 1. So these can be social media accounts, these can be email accounts, online banking and investment accounts. Okay, so the online aspect of these things, there's no value in that per se. While the bank account will have money in it and the money has value, the online access in and of itself isn't an asset of your estate per se. However, it is something that needs to be dealt with. Now, I have talked previously about dealing with social media accounts. This has been somewhat problematic over the last few years, and most, if not all, of the social media companies have developed policies on how to deal with accounts of deceased people. But social media accounts are just one aspect of this. So again, there's email accounts. You may have Gmail accounts, Yahoo Mail, even AOL. I think some people still have. What is going to happen with all of these? What's going to happen with the emails that may all still be there on the servers? What's going to happen with new emails coming through? How are you going to handle all of that? So online accounts is number 1 on the inventory list. Next is digital files. So these can be anything from photos to videos to documents, and they can be files stored on a computer. They can be stored in a hard drive to which the computer backs up. They can be stored in the cloud. Now, again, there may not be any intrinsic value in these things. Photographs is the one. Photographs and videos come to mind, right? I mean, think about it in past decades where I know my father at one time had all kinds of Super 8 movies that he took when my sisters and I were children. I mean, that there's no value in those, for us to sell early footage of, Kevin Bemmel or whatever. Nobody cares, right? Um, However, my sisters and I um, would have gotten a kick out of watching those movies, and our children, I think, even more so, because it would give them, a very, very strong factual basis from which to, haze their parents, right? Unfortunately, my dad did not take care of those, and that asset was lost. So in the digital world, where we have, what is it, iPhoto, for example, if you're a Mac user, I assume PC users have a similar thing, right? What's going to happen to all those photos? If your heirs don't have access to them, are they all going to just disappear and you're going to lose all of that? Or, have you given a copy, all of that, to the people for whom it would be meaningful to have those copies? All of those things need to be part of our estate plans. Same with videos, okay? And same with files. So I have files, for example, relating to when my grandmother died and how her funeral was taken care of, where she's buried, those kind of things. I presumably, I think my sisters have this information now as I'm talking about it, but I don't know for sure. And so, all these kinds of files, not to mention financial files, are all important. So will it be possible to administrate your estate without access to these files? And if not, how are you going to make sure that your administrator or your executor has access without compromising the security of those files, right? So there's a two-edged, or not two-edged. There's multiple facets to these issues that need to be dealt with. Okay, now next on the list here is a digital asset that actually may have value, i.e., digital currencies, whether it's Bitcoin, which is the best known, or whether it's Dogecoin, or there's thousands of digital currencies. Some of them have value, many of them do not. But the reality is, if your administrator or executor or your trustee don't have access to your digital wallet, they're not going to be able to transfer the ownership of those digital currencies. Okay, that's the point of the security of the blockchain, is that you basically can't hack into it, and no one besides the owner has the keys, so to speak, to access those assets. And so, in this case, there is a real hard asset here. Well, not a hard asset, but a real a digital asset with actual value, with intrinsic value to it, and it needs to be dealt with in a way that it can be properly handled as an asset of the estate. And by the way, for those of you who, like me, are fans of The Big Bang Theory, there's an episode. It's nobody dies in the episode, but several years before, the guys had mined some Bitcoin, and now it's several years later, and they realize, hey, this Bitcoin must be worth a lot of money, and so they want to access it, and they start going through all their old computers looking for the keys to it. And it turns out that Sheldon has downloaded them all onto a thumb drive, and then he lost the thumb drive. And it turns out the fellow who owns the comic book store found it on the floor of his comic book store. And because it was like a Batman thumb drive or something like that, he erases it and resells it, right? And of course, they lost access to that Bitcoin. It's gone forever. So this is the thing with digital currencies. They need to be planned for, just like, bank accounts and other types of hard assets. Okay, next, domain names and websites. So, excuse me, to the extent that you own a domain name and a website associated with it, that may have intrinsic value. Okay. Now, it may be only valuable to you. And for example, I own the domain bemel.com, right? I've owned it now for 30 years, I think. Now, there aren't a whole lot of Bemels in the world. I don't know that the other Bemels in the world are competing to get it. So I don't think there's any intrinsic value in Bemel.com. On the other hand, my daughter may like to have that domain. When I pass away, if she wants to do something on the internet with that name, and so provision needs to be made for her to be able to take it over. And that may entail nothing more than her being able to, sign into my control panel. And then once she has access to the control panel, she can, and the domain registrar, she can do with it whatever she wants, right? I'll be gone. What will I care? But at least she'll have access to it, as opposed to it being frozen and have to going through, a big thing to get access to it. Okay, so domain names and websites, they may have intrinsic value. I would imagine if you own something like, I don't know, camera.com, right? You could probably sell that for a lot of money to, a camera company or Apple or whatever. But it may be more like photos and such, where there's value to your heirs, but not any monetary value per se. And then finally, subscriptions and memberships. So again, these are not really assets in the strict definition of that term. However, these could be in drains on your estate financially. So if you've got whatever online subscriptions you may have, or memberships that are online, they need to be informed of your death. Otherwise, especially if they're on automatic renewal, they're just going to keep taking money off the credit card until either the credit card is shut down, or it reaches its limit, or whatever. So the access to subscriptions and memberships should be part of your estate plan as well. Okay, so next. All right, so access and security is really the key here in all of these, in maintaining whatever value they have. Okay, so somewhere in your estate plan, you should have passwords and encryption keys available to the trustee of your trust, or your administrator, or your executor, so that they can have access to all of these assets. Now, I would hasten to, we'll talk about this I'll talk about this in the next slide. But somewhere this information needs to be available. Next, if there's any two-factor authentication. So for example, if a lot of bank websites, for example, they want to send a text message to your phone in order to authenticate that it really is you logging in. Well, if that's the case, then your executor, administrator, whatever, may need to have access to your phone in order to authenticate the login. Okay, so then that's a second step there. Okay, I mean, a phone is a hard asset, right? Here's my phone, right? This is a hard asset, probably has no value in terms of real monetary worth, but it's kind of an adjunct to digital assets, because I know for me, most of my important files, like many of us, can be accessed both through my computer and through my phone. Okay, so making sure that your heirs or the people who are going to be handling your estate have access to your phone could be important. Now, and do you really want them going up to your, I know this is sort of, icky, but your dead body and like, you putting your thumbprint on it so that you have fingerprint access to your phone. I mean, that's kind of weird, right? So that needs to be taken into account of it as well. And then password managers. So most of us have password managers on whatever web browsers we're using. However, I know for me, I'm not sure why this is the case, but Google Chrome has stopped updating changes to passwords. So I have to go in and do it manually if I want my password manager to be up to date. So, if your password manager is not up to date, that's not going to help very much. Okay, but it can be a useful tool to make sure that you can share login credentials. So that's something to consider as well. All right, next. Okay, so there's a whole range of legal matters that need to be considered as well, and this is what I was starting to mention and held off when I was talking about logging into things like bank websites and such. Just because you have login credentials does not mean that you are authorized to log into a decedent's accounts. Okay, so the legal authority to do so is going to come through typically either a will or a trust or a power of attorney. Okay, now I'm going to start with the power of attorney because if the person doesn't die, but maybe they become infirmed, so they're alive but not able to take care of their own business matters, so that's where a power of attorney, what's called a durable power of attorney, comes into play. Okay, I've talked about these in past episodes, but in the absence of a power of attorney, you very well may not have authority to access that person's account. And if you do, you could be committing a crime. Okay. Now, will you get caught? Who knows, right? I point out the legalities because it's something, if you have parents, or you could even have children where you may end up having to take care of their business affairs, this is an issue for you to discuss with your attorney to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's not going to put you in any kind of legal jeopardy. Okay, so again, while the person is alive but unable to handle their business affairs, you may be able to act under a power of attorney. Once they die, that terminates the power of attorney. Now you'll need to operate under the person's will and or trust. Okay, and now if they don't have either, then it's an intestate situation, and court authority will be necessary to administrate the person's estate. But in any event, it will be under one of these documents or through the court that you would get the authority to, for example, log into bank accounts. Now, I can tell you from personal experience that even when you have the legal authority from the court, there are banks that will not accept that without going through a whole big vetting thing on their own. Okay, so these days banks can be very, very difficult to deal with. In fact, I was talking to my banker 2-3 weeks ago and mentioned something about this to him. And when your banker tells you that banks are difficult to deal with, you know that banks are difficult to deal with, right? He's in the business, right? And that's what he's telling me. And he was commiserating with me, and it wasn't the kind of thing where, he was he wasn't being difficult. It's just the whole banking system can be very, very difficult to navigate, even for bankers. Okay, and so some banks, err on the cautious, super cautious side, right? So that's why when we talk about these legal matters, it's best to plan in advance if you can. Okay, because the more you plan in advance, the more certainty you can have when it comes time for you to have to exercise whatever authority it is. Now, there are some state laws and by the way, federal laws that can come into play with respect to these. And this is why I highly recommend you speak to your lawyer about this, because they're the ones who can help you navigate whatever set of laws, regulations, etc. you may need to navigate. Now, the last legal matter are terms of service. So this would apply, for example, to social media sites. So I mentioned this already. I did a show about managing the social media accounts of a decedent. Each social media platform, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, X, I think those were the three that I used as examples. They have terms of service agreements under which we use their social media site. And those terms of service explain sort of the rights and responsibilities that a relative or an administrator has with respect to the social media of someone who has died. Okay, and that will govern how they handle things. So, in the case of terms of service for any particular social media site, you can just, Google, Facebook deceased member terms of service, right? And it'll take you right to it, and you can read what it says, or you can go watch the show I did on that before. But it's not just social media that have online terms of service. Any online access will have terms of service that describe the rights and responsibilities of the service and of the people who use it. Okay, and so these will be as important as state and federal laws and regulations, and in some cases may be more important, because although the terms of service may be less strict than state law or regulation or federal law or regulation, in which case the law and regulation is going to govern, oftentimes they may be more strict, and so it doesn't matter what the law, or, well, it's not that it doesn't matter, it's just that even though you've complied with the law or regulations, there may be other things you'll need to do in order to comply with the organization's terms of agreement. So it's better to know those up front. Okay, next. Okay, disposition. Okay, so disposition is what is going to happen to these various digital assets, after the estate closes. Okay, now, first of all, you want to designate beneficiaries. Okay, now this comes into play whether or not the assets have intrinsic value. So I talked about photographs and videos. So if you haven't already given them to your relatives, you may want to either do so right away, especially if they're digital. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take anything away from you for others to have copies of it. Minimally, you want to make sure that you designate a beneficiary, and there's things to consider, i.e., are there certain, do you want anyone who wants, or any member of your family and friends who wants copies of them, to have them, in which case the designated beneficiary for those photos and videos should be someone who's going to be willing to do that. On the other hand, you only want certain people to have it, and in which case, the designated beneficiary should be someone who will abide by your wishes. Okay. Now, when it comes to something like digital currencies that have an actual value to them, right? Who's gonna get those, right? And in theory, anyone who has access to your wallet has the ability to take those assets. So If you're intent on giving them to just one of your heirs, then they're the only ones who should get those credentials, or they and your administrator should be the only one to get those credentials, especially if there's a chance one of the other heirs might feel slighted. Okay, so then if they got a hold of the credentials, they might take the money. Once the money's gone out of the wallet, it's virtually unrecoverable. Okay, so designate beneficiaries. Second, social media accounts. What do you want done with your social media accounts? Most of the social media sites will allow the account to sort of be frozen as sort of a memorial for the person. They'll also allow it to be taken down. So what do you want to have happen in sort of your, social media legacy? Okay. And it should be specified. Or if you don't care, you can just say, I leave it up to my administrator, or these people should make a decision about my social media accounts. Okay. And that's true of your sort of greater online presence. So if maybe you have a personal website, maybe you have a blog. Okay. So those need to, just like with your social media accounts, although the social media companies have their policies for your online presence, what do you want to have happen? Do you want your blog maintained? Right? And recognize that it probably can't be maintained for free. There may be, fees for the domain to keep the domain registration up. There may be fees for, to keep up the, the server, et cetera, that it's on, right? And so if so, how is that going to be provided for? And who are you going to designate to be the sort of curator of your online presence? These are all significant issues that you should think about and deal with as part of your estate plan. Okay, and then finally, instructions for access. So how does someone access your control panel? How does someone access your domain registration? Right? That should be specified. You could say, well, that's part of access and security. Well, that's true. That's true. Doesn't hurt to, overemphasize this, because in the end, with all of these digital assets, access is the key. Proper legal access, right? As we talked about in the previous slide. Okay, so, oh, good, we're doing okay on time. Okay, finally, and this is if you have a separate professional and or business accounts, okay, so these may need to be dealt with differently than your personal accounts. Okay, let's take professional first. So let's say you're a lawyer and you have a law corporation. Well, if you have a website, presumably your website is owned by your law corporation. Okay, as are the profiles that you may have, say on LinkedIn or whatever. Okay, so if that's the case, when you die, depending on what happens with the ownership of that law corporation, that may to a large extent govern what happens to the website, profiles, etc. Okay, so in this case, there may need to be a separate part of your estate plan directing your professional or business colleagues as to what to do about these things. So I had a colleague who was a lawyer. This was back before I joined the Navy. We used to do a lot of business together. When I got out of the Navy and got back into business, I contacted him and never heard back. I eventually called the firm and was told he had passed away. But if you went on the firm's website, his profile was still there. It said nothing about him being deceased. Okay, which I don't know if that was a choice they made, or if it was just that was kind of the default, because there was no policy in place for what happened when a partner of the firm passed away. I really don't know. I wasn't going to start, getting into that with, the woman I was speaking to, but I think these are, part of our professional responsibilities. also entails that in our estate planning, we deal with these kinds of issues. And indeed, we may need to appoint someone at the firm or in our business who will then have the responsibility for carrying out whatever our wishes are in that respect. Okay. And in the case of the firm, let's say you have access to online to the firm's, bank accounts. Well, so they're the firm's bank accounts. So they shouldn't be, swept, assuming your company is a separate entity, it's an LLC or a corporation or something. It shouldn't necessarily get pulled into probate. Your interest in it may get pulled into probate, but not the entire firm. And so in that case, there should be a provision there that other members of the firm will have access to whatever accounts the firm has in order that the business can continue on as smoothly as possible. And again, from my own experience as someone who has dealt with this, not my own firm, but deals with this as a professional, I can tell you it can be an absolute nightmare if there aren't provisions for continuity for access to digital assets of a profession or a business, and it can make continuity of the business extremely difficult, and cause a lot of heartache to the clientele of the business. So this is an extraordinarily important aspect of your estate plan, or really it should be in your business continuity plan to deal with, but dealt with probably in coordination with your estate plan. Okay, so that is digital asset estate planning. Here we've got our legal stuff, just in case. Okay, and I think I missed. Oh yeah, for some reason it skipped over this. So if you have any questions, comments, the links to social media as well as my email address will be in the show notes after the show posts. Feel free to reach out to me. As always, just with the caveat, if you ask me a question that's outside of my purview, something of a legal nature or of an accounting nature, okay, I'll be happy to refer you to the appropriate professional, but I don't answer questions outside of my scope of expertise, as I hope you would expect that I would not. But I'm happy to help you find someone who can give you the answer to your question. Very happy to do that. If it's of a private nature, please do send it either by email or through direct messaging. Otherwise, if it's a general interest question, feel free to post it in the comments. Okay, and here's our legal stuff. So we'll close out the presentation. So I thank you very much for joining me this morning. A nice way to kick off the week here with a somewhat interesting and very important topic in estate planning and administration. So tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And my topic is Frozen by Philosophy. And I'm going to be talking about a situation where a war was almost lost because the military philosophy of one of the countries was such that the armed forces could not effectively respond to the military threat. So it's a history lesson turned into a business lesson. I invite you to join me tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Pacific time, for Business Lessons from the Military. And then on Wednesday, also at 10 a.m., my show, People Making Money, I'm going to be talking about taxes' effect on you and the economy. This is going beyond the fact that we, have to pay Uncle Sam our taxes every April 15th, the Ides of April. Taxes affect us in many, many ways. And this is not a political discussion. This is an economic discussion of how taxes affect our lives so we can understand it better and make better decisions. So I invite you to join me at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time on Wednesday for People Making Money. And then a week from today, I'll be back for the next edition of Trusts and Estates Weekly. So once again, thank you very much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and signing off. Marie, you are my bell. Courage at all times, my friends.